Okay, so now I want to talk about the HMP. And since we've already looked at the Humphrey, we've looked at the octopus, and we've talked about certain traits that each of them have that I think are important for us to consider in the accuracy and elegance of visual field testing, let's do a comparison. I've written up some figures and some basic characteristics that I think we need to compare when we're looking at the HMP and how valuable an asset it may be, whether it's a high-value screener or not. So what I've done is I've made up a column for octopus, which, as I said, is kind of the scientific standard, very big in Europe, up and coming in the US. But of course, we all know about the Humphrey, which again is the standard of care right now in the US. It's the language everybody speaks. But I want to compare them both to the HMP. So let's see how valid and how well this stacks up. Between you and me, I think the HMP, although it will have thresholding capability soon, actually pretty elegant if we have our way, even as a three-zone screener, as a three-zone strategy screener, it has some qualities that make it a little bit more accurate than, let's say, a screening program on the Humphrey, okay? So let's talk about that. Number one, what is the first thing we talked about? I think it was fixation. It's probably the most important dependability aspect of any visual field test. You've got to have good fixation or else the test is invalid. How do the different machines accomplish that? We talked about the octopus. The octopus has a built-in monitor which acquires the patient's pupil, and anytime, or at least acquires it while they're looking right at the fixation point. Anytime the person deviates from that, the octopus won't deliver a stimulus. So what we call that is an active monitoring system. It monitors, and when it is not optimal to deliver a stimulus, it actively avoids it, okay? For the Humphrey, what do they have? Well, the Humphrey, as we recall, used the Heil-Krakow blind spot method, delivering a bright stimulus to the area that is supposed to be blind on the patient to make sure that they're pointing where they should. If they're pointing or looking where they should, a stimulus delivered there shouldn't be seen. If they respond to it, they mustn't have been looking where they were supposed to. As I said, that doesn't account for irregular blind spots or even huge blind spots, which would allow someone to look all over the place and still not see that test point. A very flawed method. Humphrey uses another method called the fixation monitor. It uses an infrared camera to monitor the movement of the eye. It uses a couple of reference points and will tell you whether the eye was looking away or whether it was closed or whether it couldn't be found. But both of those are passive. In other words, they don't do anything to alter the course of the exam based on the person's fixation. So for that reason, we're going to call that passive monitoring. But in the case of the HMP, a Nova Vision trait that I think is really cool, and I wish it was present in all visual field testers and therapies, is that HMP uses an interactive fixation program where it presents a fixation point for the patient to watch and requires a certain task for that patient. It changes color and shape every so often, roughly about 12 to 15% of the time, and the patient has got to respond to that change. Now, the change is subtle enough where it really should only be noticed if the person's looking right at that fixation point. If they're off looking somewhere else, they will completely miss the change. And so Nova Vision requires constant attention to the fixation point and interaction with it. If the patient fails to correctly respond to fixation changes 2 times, or more than 2 times, the test stops, and the examiner has to restart it and tell the patient to stop looking around. So we've got active monitoring, passive monitoring, but fully interactive, okay? That is a bonus for the dependability of a Nova Vision HMP test. Next thing I talked about was test grid. What about the placement of the test points in the patient's field? How do the different devices put those out there, and how much benefit does that lend to the sensitivity of the test? Well, there are differing opinions, but let's just look at the basic grids. Only talking about the standard of care tests, which in these 2 guys is basically the threshold tests. Only talking about those, we found out that in the octopus, the test grids tend to be customized for the disease process. You'll pick a special test for glaucoma, the G1 or G2. You'll pick a special test for diabetes, the D1 or D2. Neurologic, lid ptosis, all of those have customized grids that place points more densely in areas where defects are thought to be likely. In the glaucoma, we've got test points more densely packed into the nasal step, into the arcuate area, etc., etc. So they have a customized grid in most of their threshold tests. They do have the capability of doing a uniform grid, but most of the time you do the customized. In the Humphrey, they feel that threshold testing should be done at exactly similar test sampling points. There is no non-uniform distribution of points. It is simply 1 point every 6 degrees. Okay, every 6 degrees for the larger fields, a test point is delivered. And that's different again than the customized, which there is no regular interval between them. So we've got a customized plot and a uniform grid plot between the two machines. Well, what do we got in the HMP? In the HMP, we've got both. So that if you want to deliver a customized field test that's likely to pick up defects mostly found in glaucoma and ischemic optic neuropathy, defects that respect the horizontal midline, and again, defects that respect the vertical, you need a customized plot. And they've got that. The HMP utilizes what I like to call the high efficiency plot, which uses less test points but uses them more intelligently in areas where defects are likely to be found. Subtle defects are likely to be found. In those areas, the points are roughly 3 to 4 degrees apart, and in other areas, it's much greater, where resolution is not very important. But also, just like the Humphrey with their uniform grid, the HMP has a choice that you can make for that too. This one's called the high density grid, or at least that's what I call it. This one uses the same thing, a uniform grid of test points that are uniformly delivered at every so many degrees. The difference, however, is that while Humphrey will deliver a test point every 6 degrees, the high density program on the HMP delivers a test every 4 degrees. So even in the uniform grid, we're delivering higher resolution and greater sensitivity to small defects. So next, what about stimulus size? Well, really there's no big difference between the name brands in that case. They both operate on a projection basis. They are projection perimeters, which is still the standard. And as such, they want to talk the same language. So the octopus is, both of these are completely variable. You can utilize whatever size and brightness you want in most cases. Actually, that's a lie. Humphrey, you can utilize whatever size you want. Octopus, you can utilize whatever size and whatever brightness you want. In fact, you can utilize flicker. There's a bunch of them. But in general, the default setting is going to be your standard Goldman 32E light dot. That's about 4 square millimeters, 4 millimeters across in each direction, squared, with a uniform brightness of about 2E. That's a long story. Well, the HMP, because it is delivered on an LED or LCD surface, doesn't have projection ability. It emits small point sources, what we call point sources of light, usually very focal, tiny point sources. Now that can be worked as an advantage because you can deliver a very bright but very small stimulus throughout a visual field. It will still be seen easily by poorly seeing people, but it's so small that it can actually detect very small defects without spilling over into a big defect area. Let me give you an example. If you've got a defect in someone's visual field, there's their optic nerve and there's the vessel above, below, there, and you've got a small defect area about that big, and we'll blow that up over here and say that the defect is an area that big, and let's say that defect is only about 2 millimeters wide, okay? In the example that we use, standard 32E stimulus, let's project that on the rare chance that it falls right on the defect. A 4 millimeter square stimulus is going to do this, like that, okay? Because it's 2 and 2 more. It's going to be seen because over here is healthy retina. We're going to miss that defect. But if you deliver, let's say, a smaller stimulus, like about a 2 millimeter stimulus, then that stimulus relative to the defect, if we just redraw the defect here, if you use a smaller point source stimulus, like a screen that emits light instead of has it projected, you have the ability to deliver a smaller stimulus like that. And there is the chance that that stimulus will only fall in the defect area and not spill over into adjacent areas. It's kind of a long shot, but in general, a smaller but brighter stimulus actually can be more sensitive than a bigger and dimmer stimulus. You've got a small bright stimulus about that big and a big dim stimulus about that big. This guy is going to be able to pick up smaller defects, okay? So in that case, again, the HMP, because it's new, it is a display, not a projection perimeter, it uses a smaller stimulus. I eyeball it, I see it as about a 2.2e stimulus. Let's say smaller. Question mark, 2.2e. Small enough to be roughly about half the size as a 4e, but again, that's not a precise measurement. That's just kind of ballparking it. In general, smaller just means it can be more sensitive, but it's bright enough to be picked up by a healthy retina just as well as this. I think that's a plus. Okay, what about the time that stimulus is presented? I talked about that with the other devices. On the octopus, it seems to have taken into account that Broca-Sulzer law that I told you about. Broca and Sulzer did some experiments, found out that if you're trying to get people to notice flashes of light as dimly as possible, the optimum period of time that you should display it for the person to see it, even at its dimmest, is somewhere between 50 and 100 milliseconds. Any longer than that, and you tempt what's called sensory adaptation. The retina only sees new things, so the retina will tend to tune it out. The other downside is that anything longer than that also allows enough time for the patient to refixate. So the octopus utilizes that and delivers stimuli at about 100 milliseconds. The Humphrey delivers a stimulus, the default setting is 200 milliseconds, probably because it's easier for profoundly challenged people or dense cataract people to see 200 milliseconds. But still, it can tempt refixation, which when you're only using passive monitoring is not such a great idea. Well, the HMP in its early design days really was kind of influenced by the octopus because of its scientific integrity and its German-Swiss birthplace. So what the HMP uses is the same as the octopus. We're at about 100 milliseconds of display time, which means that if anything, it's probably going to be slightly more accurate as far as subtle presentation and no refixation. It's going to be a little more accurate than 200 milliseconds on the Humphrey, about the same as the octopus. Okay, stimulus time. I want to talk about something else, and of course in real estate it's more important, but it's kind of the same thing when you're buying equipment for eye care, and that is location, location, location. What is the location that we have to successfully use these devices? Well, in the case of an octopus, you saw one. You need a dedicated room pretty much, or at least a room with enough space in it for a table, for the perimeter, and probably an area for the computer as well. So both the Humphrey and the octopus need a dedicated room to be used, and it should be dark because those two devices, again, use projection perimetry, so the brightness of the bowl, including light falling into it, must be dim in order for the amount of contrast to be there for us to see the stimuli. Okay, so the brightness of the room is pretty important, and you need a whole room to dedicate yourself to field testing. But with the HMP, the location is basically anywhere that there is AC power in the current device, anywhere. You can bring this thing into the lobby, you can bring it into a public health clinic, a health fair, a school screening, a rehab center, a nursing home, any place that has an AC plug, 120 volt AC plug, you can do the HMP. It is a 3-zone screening utilizing near threshold and very bright stimuli, so room illumination is relatively unimportant. You can get a felt drape to kind of enhance the darkness of the display, but because it's not a projection perimeter, but instead an emitting monitor, it gives off point sources of light, it tends to have a greater brightness quality all on its own. It is less susceptible to ambient brightness. So you can deliver that test in the waiting room and be able to tell whether this person's got near threshold vision everywhere, or do they have a defect. It's a good screener anywhere and a great portable device. For just that reason, that's why this thing is really the only perimetry device anywhere right now that is fully both from the spirit of the law and the letter, or the spirit of the rule and the letter of the law, is truly ADA deductible, 100% ADA deductible. So bring it anywhere that has power. Some less important aspects of the HMP is, what do you do with the results? In other words, you get the results, you can see them on the screen, all of these guys can do that. What does the HMP do? Well, again, we're kind of influenced by octopus. So in the octopus, when you get a result, it automatically, you can choose to have it exported to a PDF, and because any computer you want can plug into the octopus, you can just put that PDF on the desktop, Or you can stick a USB port or a thumb drive into that gadget, and you can export that PDF right to your thumb drive, walk down the hall, print it, give it to the patient, whatever you want. In the case of the Humphrey, it uses an onboard printer and an onboard floppy processor. You need to use the built-in computer. That's all you can use. Exporting files is a bit of a task. It's a big deal. So it is not nearly as convenient as this. And 3 guesses what we do on the HMP. You got it. This thing exports to PDF and to any device you want with a USB port, okay? Most simply, you stick a USB thumb drive in there and you can bring that result anywhere. Now, if you're going to ask me at this point, can we compare each test results to previous test results, kind of like the Humphrey and the Octopus do with the glaucoma progression analysis or long-term fluctuation, things like that. At this point, no. Those programs or those test results are really a picture file. It's a graphic with numbers and grayscales on it so you can look at it, but they are not committed to a digital database. In other words, we can't over time compare them yet. Not for this price point. If you want that capability, the circuitry goes through the ceiling and it's much, much more. And I think that's a lot more than you're going to want from a portable printer. If the demand is great enough, it's down the road. It's very doable. It's just a question of cost and weight and things like that. So right now you can export to PDF or USB, but each file is a standalone file. Lastly, what I listed here is who can use the HMP, the user level. Well, hopefully I'll get some screen captures of the menus of the Humphrey and of the Octopus, but if I can't, you really have to know what you're doing on those babies to navigate through the program. They use some terminology, some choices, and some parameter settings that are kind of hard to understand unless you know visual field technology. That's why I teach a course at Western University in perimetry, because if you took one of these smart students and put them in front of either of these guys, they would be in mystery. Thankfully, the HMP is pretty much anyone who is literate. So as long as they are someone with reasonable mainstream intelligence and they can read, they probably will be able to navigate through the HMP menus. They're big, bright, colorful touchscreen commands, and they're very simple. I mean, you've only got a few tests. You just see the test right there, you pick it. Which eye are you going to test? Right, left? None of this ODOS. It's right, left. You know, you can do all of that. So now let's talk about users. Who can use these devices? Well, I hope to be able to get a screenshot of the menus of the Humphrey and of the Octopus. I may not. If I can't, take my word for it. Both of those devices, you do need some training on either of them to be able to intelligently navigate your way through. In fact, there's a lot of eye docs out there, and you know this as well as I do, that you ask them to get through the menus of the visual field machine, and out they go asking for the technician because they can't find their way through that. It's not easy. You need training. Well, thankfully, that's not the case with the HMP. With the HMP, anyone who is literate can usually navigate their way through the menus. They're bright, they're colorful, they're very simple and intuitive. You can actually have reception staff or a volunteer or even a member of the family, as long as they've just had a few words of instruction, be able to deliver the HMP. So all things considered, what I've tried to do is show you with the simple first version of the head-mounted perimeter by NovaVision, there are a number of reasons that despite the fact that it is a 3-zone screener, which between you and me, the original patients who were meant for this, handicapped, brain-injured patients, a 3-zone is about all you're going to be able to do with those folks. And a 3-zone, if you know what you're looking for, is usually plenty of information. But this is more than just a classic 3-zone screening like you find on the other devices. It has interactive fixation, which makes it more dependable. It has both a customized and a uniform test grid that you can choose. It has a smaller stimulus size, which can help you unveil smaller defects. It has a faster stimulus time than Humphrey, which means that it's less tempting to refixation, and it has more of a potent detectability with less light. It needs no dedicated room. It can be brought anywhere that has electrical supply. The results of tests can export to PDF, just like the Octopus, and you don't need to use the onboard printer or use floppy disks. And just about anybody in your office who has had just minimal pointing and instead of in-depth training can operate the HMP. Even family members of the patients can operate the HMP. So here's a device that I am just tickled pink about. It's offered a whole new dimension of our testing ability here at Western University. The kids love the interactive fixation monitoring. In fact, the fixation point moves periodically. They love that. It's a much more interesting test. We've had great luck. We started out with it just in our brain injury clinic. We're walking it over now to the regular clinic to grab a quick visual field test if the Humphrey's busy or the octopus is busy. And now our pediatrics guy brings it out to his school screenings and his special kids centers. It's finding a lot of use, and if I hadn't brought it myself, I think we would have bought one or two long ago. So hopefully you've remembered some of what we've spoken about, and if you don't, call me. So let's go get them. Gone ahead and, hold on, we'll cancel this. I've gone ahead and programmed in patient information. I'm just going to show the camera here that, oops, a daisy. Yeah, he'll hold that. So the menu is here. We're going to start with patient entry. And no, I don't want to put a new patient in. I'm just going to do the one that I already programmed in, which is me, David, Todd. And I'm not going to bother with birth date, examiner ID, and all that stuff. So we're just going to go to a test. Now, basically, these are the test options. I mean, this is the basic overview of the patient. But I want to know what kind of test or how I can do tests. So I'm going to push test options. And my choices have to do with right eye, or I'm sorry, fast, normal test speed, or slow test speed. And I can also scroll through the different test strategies. This one is the 60-degree 82-point test. That means 30 degrees on each side of the mid of the fixation point. The 82-point one is what I call the high efficiency test. It's cleverly constructed to have more points where it needs it and waste fewer points in the mid periphery. So we're going to go ahead and stay with that. We're going to use monocular testing, normal pace, and we're going to proceed. Boom, 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 boom. We're going to accept it, or just at least scroll up, scroll down back to the 60-degree 82, and we're going to accept that. Okay, so we're back to the overview. Let's continue. All right, so once the patient puts on the headset, we're going to do that. Let's make sure that's comfortable for you. And scoot in a little bit so everybody can see you. What do you think? This one goes on top, yep. Is that okay or too snug?
That'll be fine.
Great. All right, so he doesn't wear correction right now, and that's not really important unless we're doing a threshold. And this is just a 3-zone, so we're going to kind of maneuver it perfectly. The good thing is that the screen is light emitting, not it doesn't receive projection, so ambient light really doesn't affect the contrast as much. Okay, so first thing we got to do is make sure that the patient has the headset aligned properly. So to do that, what we're going to do is hit alignment. Yes, we're going to. It's asking me if it wants to overwrite the last patient results, and we are going to do that. So what should happen then is this will show me on the display what the patient should be seeing. And patient, can you actually see 4 little different colored icons in each corner?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Are they all equally clear, or if not, you should just adjust the headset a little bit to make sure that they're all
Pretty good.
pretty good? Okay. So we don't have to slide, we don't have to push, we don't have to tilt. If we did, we could push one of these buttons. But we're done with the alignment phase. So we have 2 things the patient has to do. One is the fixation task, and the other is the peripheral stimuli. I want them to practice each separately. So let's do the first one first. Okay, patient, I want you to be able to interact with the fixation point. What you're going to look for is a colored spot in the middle. Whenever it changes color or shape, you're going to push that mouse button. Let's try it out. Okay, it gives me the instructions here. We're going to go on. Okay. Okay, we can hear him responding, so we know that he's doing it right. Okay, so he's obviously got the hang of this. Let's go ahead and stop the practice. And now we can try, we're going to go to the next. Practice went well. Now we're going to try practice number 2. Patient, what you'll see is little white spots showing up in your side vision. Whenever you see one, you go ahead and push that button. Let's try it. And of course, it gives me the instructions to speak. Let's consider it spoken. Here we go. Well, I guess it's not true when his mother said if he didn't stop it, he'd go blind. Okay, so he's going on. And it's obvious that he's got the hang of this task. So now what we're going to do is basically go to a full exam, okay? And what we'll see is, as he goes through the exam, we'll see the results show up on the screen. So let's go ahead and do both those tasks together. Patient. And again, the instructions that I'm supposed to give him, blah, 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 fixation point, blah, 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 peripheral stimuli. I'm going to go ahead with it, and I'm going to place the tablet back in the rest. Now, I'm not able to see the stimuli when they appear to him, but I am allowed to see the fixation point when it's presented. Now, he's making his way through the 82-point test. That is the high efficiency test. What it's telling me is how many stimuli I have left before he's done. I'm seeing how many fixation tests he passed, and how many times he pushed the button for no reason. That's false positives. What you should be seeing is the test is programmed traditionally to test the more important central points first. The central and paracentral points are tested first, especially at the beginning where it thresholds the 4 paracentral points. Now every now and then the fixation point will move, and we just heard it give the sound cue that it was going to move the central square.
Make sure it's the way it's supposed to be.
And we're done. Cool beans. Okay, now let me get that off of you. Now I'm going to talk to the camera about the results. And this is kind of cool because look, it doesn't use a blind spot test, it uses active fixation. And there's your blind spot right there.